Well, welcome everybody to the July 12th, 23 Light Board meeting. We have two new members today. I'll do introductions. Actually, we don't have a chair's update, so I'll do introductions right now. So John Dalton and Bianca Taylor are two new Light Board members, and I want to welcome them. Both of them have some relevant experience to energy and what we do here. So their opinions are very much appreciated. We have our next meeting is scheduled for August 9th.
No, I can't be there at the 9th. I think we changed that to the 23rd, and I neglected to put it on the agenda as the 23rd.
All right. Thank you, Dave. So our next meeting will be on the 23rd. That's quite a ways away. Yeah, but that's summertime. That's what happens with all the schedule adjustments. All right, so August 23rd and then September 13th. We had some minutes ready for review, but Warren was not here today, and we decided to do the review of minutes at the next meeting. So if anyone would like a copy of the April 12th minutes that are ready but not yet approved, just reach out to me and I'll forward them to you. And with that, I think we're ready for Dave's update. And after reading it, there's a very cool state EV tool that I found out about, which is great. Sorry to steal your thunder there.
That's okay. Excuse me. So we're now offering rebates to businesses or large multi-unit residential properties that switch from oil, propane, electric heat to heat pumps. The rebate ranges from $2,500 to $4,500 per ton of cooling capacity, depending on the type of heat pump installed. Customers are eligible for up to $50,000 in heat pump rebates for a 3-year period. In the update, I put the link to the website. CMLP and the Sustainability Department are co-sponsoring a free EV test drive event on October 1st at the high school. Attendees will be able to test drive one of dozens of EV models, so that's pretty exciting. They'll be able to talk to local owners of EV that participate, and we're encouraging people to sign up for that. Like what Brian was mentioning, the state's Department of Transportation has launched a mass vehicle census website, and it has basically the number of vehicles in each community, whether it be fossil fuel powered hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or full battery, and it's that are garaged in each community. Starting January 1st of 2020, it has 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. We internally have been compiling that list using information from the assessor's office. And so we did a comparison, and the information is accurate. So that's going to save us some staff time, which is great. Looking at the census, we have 930 plug-in hybrid or full battery electric vehicles in Concord as of January 1st of this year. That's about 6.4% of all vehicles in Concord. So, not bad. It does show that Concord is the third highest in plug-in hybrid or full battery vehicles. Lexington and Weston are higher than us. We came in at 6.4%. They have 6.5%. And then with just full battery vehicles, all electric, we're the fourth highest. Lexington, Weston, and Lincoln are higher than us. So we're doing pretty well compared to all the communities in the Commonwealth. I mentioned at the last meeting the electrical vehicle charging stations, the DC fast chargers. We're backlogging some switches, and so I filed an extension with the state for the grant, and we were extended to December 31st. So that's a positive thing. The smart metering project. We have a new project manager. We're meeting this week with them. So that'll be good. The secure file transfer portal server has been built. Credentials have been set up and shared via the NISC portal. NISC and Eaton are still working on the integration of the meter files. So that's holding us up on deployment. I think, we were planning mid-July to start the deployment. I'm pushing that to early August, assuming that the integration gets completed. And the last thing from my update, the transformer bids that we issued, we reviewed them. Each bidder took exception to our standards. And so we're gonna not award the bid, which was a tough decision. And we're gonna do some modifications to the bidding documents and reissue it. Our hopes is that we'll get more bidders. We were missing some of the major bidders because of the language that we've used. And hopefully we get some better bid prices. So that's a pretty big thing. If you remember, the transformer lead times were 1 to 3 years, depending on what we ordered. So not awarding it, we felt was in the best interest of Concord so that we could get some more competitive bids.
With that, we've got these long lead times. What we're going back and redoing the bid process so that we can get more bidders involved. Did the people who rejected participating in the bid, the reasons they gave, were they realistic, or were they, how did that come about? How did so many say we're not going to make an effort, and how do they communicate that they're not making an effort?
So I don't know if making an effort is the right words, Brian, but
Okay.
Essentially the manufacturers that didn't bid took exception to some of the language that we had in the bid documents about firm pricing and no escalators. And those are the exceptions that the bidders that did bid took. And so if we were to accept one of those bids, we'd be taking exceptions that other people didn't bid because of. So we feel that putting it back out and letting all the bidders bid on level playing field will be better for us in terms of pricing and availability.
Okay, good. So it's about their ability to escalate based on changes in the market 2 to 3 years from now when they actually deliver.
Right.
Okay. Alice, you have a question.
I just have a quick question. I understand needing to go out and rebid. I'm just wondering, given the long lead time for both putting out the bids and selecting someone and the lead time for equipment, whether we are at how much increased risk does that put us as a system without having the additional transformers on site, because it's still years out before we have them?
Yep. We have a good supply of inventory right now. But that's not to say in 2 years we'll be in the same spot. So going back out for rebid may give us better lead times on some manufacturers. So we're hoping, some of the largest manufacturers in the United States didn't bid because of some of the language. So we're hoping that we'll get some better lead times. And what we'll end up doing is valuing the total ownership cost of the transformer that our bid and the lead times, and making a decision on where we go based on a combination of those two things.
Yeah, gives me comfort to know that that we have some leeway, we have some capacity still in our storage.
Yeah, but it is a concern for us. So, you're not wrong to bring it up.
Yeah. John, you have a question.
Yeah, Dave, just more of a comment, and I realize it might not necessarily be the purview of the board, but one of the areas where I practice pretty regularly is with respect to kind of procurement issues. And one thing we find is that obviously the challenge here, and I understand why you wouldn't be interested in any escalation. But if you are going to allow escalation, it sometimes helps to say these are the types of escalators that we'd allow. Because right, the challenge becomes if people are using different escalators, how do you compare those two different bids? So if you can say, you know, we're going to allow a CPI or a producer price index or another index, I think it helps just to provide some consistent direction to enable a more consistent evaluation.
Yep,
Just a comment.
and we did reach out to the state on that topic to make sure that what we do is in line with what the procurement laws allow. So good comment, and we're following that.
Excellent. I think this, you know, we've been doing the tracking of EV adoption ourselves in a very laborious manner, but accurate. And it's great to see that the state is doing this. And this will be a real big help. And I'm happy to see that the October 1st event is coming together and is planned well ahead of the date that it's going to happen. What is your plan for promoting this event to the residents? Do you bill inserts, I assume, other materials?
Yeah, I haven't talked to Jan about the details of that, but my assumption is we're going to follow the same stuff we've done in the past, which is, you know, social media, news and notices. I think we've done a bill insert before, so we'll probably follow the same pattern that we've done before, which has been very good, and we've had very good numbers based on that.
And we're going to have the dealers doing the test drives, no residents using their cars for the test drives.
Oh, I
That was
believe it's dealers.
Yeah. Yeah, so when I did it in 2016 and 2018, that was the big insurance risk, was
Right.
having a personal car doing test drives and an accident.
Yeah, and nothing's changed with that, so.
Okay. Well, I just want to make sure, because there's going to be a lot of residents that want to offer that, and Tesla generally doesn't do these types of things because they don't consider themselves a dealer, so it gets mucky.
Yep.
All right. Are we ready to move on to broadband?
Sure.
John, one quick question. Yeah.
Yeah,
What's up?
just another thought is, I'm just wondering, I mean, those are great statistics. And I'm just wondering if it would make sense when marketing this event to indicate that Concord is third. You know, I just feel like that could create some community pride and cause people to kind of step up. I realize this is an approach that's sometimes used in terms of energy efficiency programs to incent people to essentially do the right thing. Just a thought.
Yep.
I think that's a great idea.
I might also suggest we use the Concord Bridge to let people know that there's an event that's coming up.
Absolutely. Any other board questions? Seeing none, I guess that Jason is out today. So Dave, do you want to do the broadband update as well?
Yep.
Great.
So I sent out Jason's update, or Karen did, in the board packet. A couple of items in there. We're getting closer to hiring a network engineer after a long recruitment. We hope that we'll have some good news to report at the next meeting. And that will, if we do, that will bring the network engineer to full complement, which would be great. Concord Broadband is working on identifying multi-dwelling units in town and collecting data on them. This will help prioritize expansion into the areas using identical criteria. Broadband manager Dale Hartling has reviewed design fiber for the locations to determine the readiness for each. So, you know, that's moving forward. We have collected data on locations that once had Concord broadband service, and they no longer do. And we're going to start working on marketing to those new homeowners or businesses. It'd be an easy and relatively inexpensive installation since they already have the fiber run to them. So we're going to target that and see what kind of adoption we can get out of those ones. And this month we had multiple meetings with Calix, which is the vendor that makes our broadband hardware. We're planning on future rollout of newer equipment that supports speeds up to 10 gigabits per second And we'd like to have data that makes capital plans. So I think those are the highlights of the report. If you have any questions, I'd take them.
Not a lot of questions. It's good to see a data-driven approach to multifamily dwellings. I do know that those properties are uniquely difficult with the HOA boards and the need for them, we can bring it to the property, but then there's a long stretch between bringing it to the property to all the different units. And there's a lot of work with the condo boards to get that to happen. And that's a big barrier. So it's good to see that we're using standardized criteria for approaching these MDUs.
Yeah, and I think that's what we have to do, because we do have a lot of customers that are interested, and we gotta, figure that out. We can't just sit back and say we can't get it to you. So we're taking that approach, and we'll be interested to see what the data says.
Great. Any other questions from the board? Seeing none, we will go on to the first agenda topic of opt-out metering policy. Dave, do you want Laura to take this, or will you take it?
Yeah. Laura, do you want to take it? Do you want me to take it?
Either way, I'll do it. Since this is an easy one.
Smart woman.
Okay. I realize that half of our board this morning is new, and so may not know the history behind some of these topics that we're going to talk about today. Thank you, Dave. But at prior meetings, board members raised the issue of affording a lower fee structure for income qualified residents who choose to opt out of a physical meter. So these are customers who don't want to have either an automatic meter reading, AMR, which is the drive-by system, or an AMI meter, which is the new meters that we're putting in. The board had previously voted to charge those customers a one-time $75 fee and an ongoing monthly manual read fee of $20. At the last board meeting, it was decided that the allowance to offer the income qualified customers would be a waiver of the $75 install remove fee. And so what we're bringing to the board today, it's not a tariff, so it doesn't need to be voted on. It's merely a policy that's posted on CMLP's website. But we're proposing to change the policy in the following ways. Change the effective date from March 2021 to August 2023. So this would become effective August 1st. And what we would do is simply insert the statement, the remove install fee will be waived for customers who qualify for the residential service rate assistance rider. So this is in keeping with what the board indicated they wish to see at the last board meeting. We're bringing it to you just to show you what we plan to do to change the policy, and that we will be posting this and making an effective date of August 1st.
Great, thank you. Yeah, this was for the new members. This was the result of many discussions in the past about how to manage time of use when people want to opt out of that. There's a group that really is adamant that they don't want a radio read meter on their home. So we created the opt-out policy, and then we had someone inquire that was on the residential assistance program saying that they would like to opt out. So we wanted to add this to the policy so that the one or two people that qualify for this and want it don't have to pay that install fee. Bianca.
I'm familiar with the 5G, people who may not want the what is it, the
EMF.
the EMF,
RF.
it's Yeah, it's particularly related to the microwaves, and then the smart metering, but it seems, I'm a bit shocked that CMLP has to drive out to homes to read the meter manually. And it would appear to me that $20 is not really sufficient.
It isn't. So to drive a truck out, to read the meters every month, is actually a bit more than that, a bit more than $20 cost per customer. But we didn't want it. We didn't want to charge them $35, $50 just to read the meter every month. We felt that that was too much of a burden in past discussions with the board. And so we settled on this $20 fee. And the rate that they go on has a 4% increase compared to the average time of use. So their flat rate will be about 4% higher. And this is like 10 different meeting discussions about how to get here. But there was a strong need from the very beginning to give these people some analog way of reading their meter that did not require any kind of radio signals. And we could not find the perfect technology to do a wired meter. And we found some examples, but nothing that we could procure and operate. So driving the truck was required. And because that was required, that's the $20 fee. The $75 fee is the cost of getting this special meter versus the AMI meter, so that there's no radio reads from that. So that's kind of the background on it. Does that kind of give you context?
It does, and I think I'm a bit shocked that we would. What's the cost burden for CMLP on this?
So we don't know that yet, and that's one of the big things. So after we have everything deployed, we'll review all the revenue and losses and bring that back to the board, and the board will be able to modify based on the data that we have. So we don't have that data right now. And so, we can do what a truck roll costs and come up with a number, but what we don't know is if we have 4 customers in a neighborhood, how is that going to calculate? So until we get that data, we have to start someplace. And that was kind of the idea behind where we started.
Yeah.
Just a starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, I mean, depending on, how strongly one feels about this, one should be willing to pay for the additional burden on CMLP. I do think $20 is just too low. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is that on the microwave side, and I'm assuming this works also for radio signals, you can just put a Faraday cage on the one side going, not outside. This needs to be read, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of, I'm assuming that the concern is the
So,
radiation coming into the home.
well, Bianca, we've had many discussions about the radio frequencies, what we can do to mitigate. And I don't want you triggering those conversations because it took up a lot of time. And we understand that the customers have a concern, and what they really want is no radio signals on the property. Not even yes, a Faraday cage could deflect it, and we could do other things to mitigate it and avoid that $20. And avoid was probably more like a $35 expense. But for now, I think we've decided to go forward with a non-radio meter, walking a guy out to those customers. And if we find that we have 5 customers that do this opt-out policy, well, then that $20 is drastically insufficient to operate the program. But if we have 50 customers that opt out, then that $20 might be more appropriate. But we don't know some things right now. And we've kind of come to this here. What's in front of us for this decision is to allow those that are income qualified to not pay the $75 fee. And I think that's a pretty easy decision for the board. because we've, based on history, those 160 customers that are income qualified.
Roughly 160.
Yeah, so they're a small group, but they're people who could really, we want to give them the ability to do what anyone else does without the cost burden. And that's kind of been a philosophy choice for Concord.
Okay, but this is going to be reviewed again once we have data.
Yes. Yeah, in about a year, once we've got AMI deployed and people on default, we'll come back to this stuff. Definitely. Pamela, I'm going to keep us going on the agenda, and I will take comments if time allows. Right now, we're falling a little bit behind on the agendas. Thank you. Any other questions from the board on this? Can we give a general consensus in a straw poll that we're in favor of waiving the $75 fee for income qualified? Those that agree on the board, just give me a quick wave. Those that don't, you can give me a thumbs down. Okay. So I like non-unanimous votes. So it's good to see that we've got 3 to 4. 3 to 1 on this vote. So that gives guidance to the policy.
Yep.
All right, next on the agenda is a second meter charge. We have, well, Dave, you want to take this and you can explain?
Sure.
Okay.
Let me, Laura put together some slides, so let me just share that. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
So we've been talking about second meter fees for a while, and Laura, jump in whenever you want. But basically Laura compiled this slide deck, which is literally one slide. It's pretty simple. So kind of compiling what other utilities do with a second meter charge. And you can see here, it's different for every utility.
Dave, do you mind if I give a little background to why we're
Oh,
talking
sure.
about this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So to give the new members a little background, we have a lot of legacy rates going back to the 90s, where we had sub-metering for ETS, and then we have sub-meters for heat pump for heating units like heat pumps for some customers. We have these secondary meters are becoming prolific, and this is partly due to legacy decisions. But recently, we've found that auxiliary meters, where a garage in a multifamily has a meter just to manage time of use for charging an EV or other uses, and they also have a home meter on the same bill for that one customer. And the interpretation, according to the legacy policies, was that those customers get 2 meter fees. But we have, over the last few years, been increasing the meter fee to do more fixed collection for distribution expenses, which has meant that fee has gone from a little over $6 to $18.50. And now, because of the policies, some customers are getting 2 $18.50 charges just because they have a garage separated from their living unit and they need 2 meters. So we want to go to a policy where people are allowed to have a second meter, but we want to collect for the cost of that second meter without collecting from the customer twice for those fixed distribution expenses. So we're trying to decide whether or not we have a second meter charge, what that meter charge would be, or if they get the full $18. So that's the conversation we're in the midst of, and staff is coming back to us with some examples.
Yeah, so these are the examples of what others have done. And it varies, right? Some it's 50%. You can see that some have just pulled it out of midair and said, hey, we're going to do this. Some don't charge a second meter charge. I think the important thing with this is we have a number of different scenarios. And I outlined them. There's about 14 different scenarios. So, Brian brought up the detached garage. That's different than, having multi-meters on the side of a house, right? Or a sub-meter or whatnot. So if you have, a second structure with a whole new separate service, there's different costs associated with that. And currently we charge for the second meter charge on that because it's a separate service and a separate account. Where we have, a double meter socket that's both line side, that could be a different scenario where you look at it differently. So there's a bunch of different scenarios. I put them together. I believe it's all inclusive of what we have in Concord. I believe that was shared in the packet. So those are the considerations that I think the board needs to think about and determine.
Yeah, so what we have here are the examples of a second meter collection fee. What the board has to define for staff is, what are we collecting for? Are we collecting for the expense of a second meter? Are we collecting for the expense of a second meter and the billing and other attributes that may cause a financial impact? Are we collecting for the distribution system because we've got 2 line drops? I think I would say no to the third one, yes to the first 2. But I want to have a discussion with the board to frame a number that we can start with to put out the second meter fee. And also we have to talk about the who gets the second meter fee and what scenario is the other topic we have to discuss. So let me ask for questions from the board because we've been talking for a while. Does this question in front of you make sense? Bianca.
Yeah, I just want to know, so what, in terms of the cost to CMLP for the second meter, what is that? I mean, it's part, I understand it's part of the fixed charge. So ostensibly it's 0 additional fee, or what would that fee be? What's the cost to CMLP?
So if I
Right.
could, I try to make it elemental. Basically, if you have a second meter, even if we don't have any other infrastructure, we still have to pay for that second meter. They cost a few $100s. So we have to recoup, right, the cost of that meter. And a customer who wants 2 of them should pay more than a customer who only needs or wants 1. So that's one part of the expense, is just capital recoupment and, interest costs. But there are other costs depending on that physical configuration scenario. So for example, if they have a separated garage and we have a separate line, like the actual wire, right, that comes from our distribution system, we have to pay for that wire. And that's a second wire versus just one wire going into the house. So in some cases, we'd have to recoup for that, but not in others. So one of the problems is that the costs are not going to be the same for all these different scenarios. And yet you probably don't want to have a policy where you charge, a certain amount if you're a second garage detached from the house, another amount if it's a sub-metered EV and it's connected as a sub-meter through the panel, a third charge if it's a multi-meter, you know what I mean? It would be too complicated. And so we may need to do some averages or rolling it up instead of being exactly precise, because it would just be too confusing. And then the other cost that Brian's talking about is charges that we typically bill per meter, and that would be like meter reading costs, right? That's not the physical meter, but the cost either for the technician to go out and read it, or in the new system, it's just going to be a cost for, reading more meters than we had to before. So there are different costs for different scenarios.
I want to separate actually maybe cost versus pricing. Pricing being what we charge customers and cost being what CMLP has to incur. And And so I understand we would have different price, having too many pricing mechanisms would be burdensome for CMLP too, because then, we have to manage all the different pricing. But is there any way to get an average cost, meaning cost of what CMLP incurs, and go with that?
Dave,
Yeah, I think with that, there's about 15 different scenarios for meter charges that we've identified. I think it's all inclusive. I'm sure we maybe missed one, but you'd have to go through each scenario and come up with that cost for the scenario. And that's a
And
little.
that's burdensome. Okay. I'm trying to figure out the least cost effect, the most cost effective way to do this for CMLP. So I can certainly throw out a vote, but it would be one that I'm just trying to gauge, how the from CMLP's perspective, is it going to be a drain on finances, or neutral, or revenue positive, revenue negative, neutral, or negative?
Yeah. So Bianca, the good thing is that we're not trying to do a vote today. We're trying to define the question for staff to do the work to come back to us with something to vote on. So,
okay, then
yeah.
I think that's my question then.
Great. John.
Yeah, just another comment here. I'm just wondering if it might help. I know other utilities typically characterize what we're characterizing as the meter charge as the customer charge. I just feel like that might be a cleaner way to kind of characterize the costs associated with this. And so we could basically say that there's a customer charge, and within that customer charge is the cost associated with one meter. And then there would be kind of an ancillary meter charge.
That's a really good one.
Just a thought.
Just to expound on that. So so we used to have the $6 customer charge or meter fee, which was based on recouping for the billing process and the cost of the meter. Maybe we create a fee category instead of, leave the meter fee, but change it back to that methodology of $6, and then have a fixed distribution recovery fee as the 15 something. And that way we can charge 2 of the customer charge when they have 2 meters. And then we have a designated fixed distribution collection on the bill that's just that per customer collection versus per meter. That's a really good idea, John. Alice, did you have some input?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, we have talked about this a lot, but I just want to correct one bit of language I think I heard, that having a second meter or sub-meter is not necessarily a customer choice. When customers opt in to certain new technologies, it comes embedded in that technology. When you put in solar panels, we were required to install some sort of meter. It wasn't a choice, did I want A or B? It just happens, right? It's part of the system. And the other thing I just wanted to suggest is that the idea of the meter charge was for a way for us to collect fixed costs. So we were going to try and over a period of time, I'm not sure why we decided a period of time, because it's cost neutral on a bill, to shift our costs that are fixed costs to a meter charge and have a variable charge for all the power supply that we pay. And so a discussion about whether to charge the person or the meter seems to be at the crux of what we're trying to decide. We want to pay for our fixed costs through a fixed fee so that we know we can keep the CMLP running. And then we want to be able to pay our variable costs. So the question to me, since should be rate neutral or cost neutral to CMLP, we still pay the same total amount. It's just which bucket we pay it in. So I don't want to complicate this too much with one meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, whatever people have. If we're trying to just recoup the fixed costs to run CMLP.
Yeah, so the fixed cost recovery component is the per customer that we're trying to collect. The meters are per meter. So the cost of the meter, the cost of the billing of that meter. So yeah, that's the crux of what we're trying to define of how do we price, what do we think is a fair way to price that second meter, if that's what we're collecting for, is just the meter itself and the operation of it. The other question that we haven't gotten to yet is, when will the second meter fee apply? And you hinted at the fact that some of these rates, like, you know, EV time of use or the R7 heat pump rate that we have coming up on the agenda, those, in order to get that rate, you need another meter. Under our current metering infrastructure, when we go to time of use and the expenses are in the time of use rate, that becomes less, there's less of those rider rates that need a meter, because everything will be bundled into one time of use rate. So it's kind of, we're dealing with the legacy problems, and this is kind of frustrating, because I know how convoluted and arbitrary decisions have led us here. So it is a difficult one. But I'm going to stop rambling and let Bianca talk for a bit.
I think Pamela had her hand up first.
Well, so the way that I operate is, first the board discusses the agenda topic, and then we'll take public comments if we have time within the
Oh, I
agenda
see.
topic.
Okay.
And
Wasn't
then
sure.
we always take time for public comments at the end, even if we don't have time.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems like to me that through this discussion that the number one question that we need to answer is, what is the cost, meaning CMLP cost for an additional meter? And we probably need to know all of those different scenarios to figure it out. Because if the cost, and I'm talking not price, but cost for a CMLP, let's say it's pretty minimal, it's really easy to just say, you know, it's $1 extra for everyone in town. And then everybody, you know, assuming everybody gets on board with solar panel or heat pumps or something else, it's a marginal cost that, you know, to CMLP that's, let's call it irrelevant. Now, if it's like a pretty relevant, sizable cost for CMLP, then I think this discussion makes a lot more sense, right? But if it turns out like, hey, it's just a few pennies, or, you know, Laura said it was $200 for the life of the meter, which the life of a meter is, I'm going to guess, is 30 years at least. It's just basically pennies that gets amortized, right? So anyway, that was just, I'm just saying, I think that seems to be the overriding, in my mind, the overriding question is, what is this going to do to see, you know, what's the cost to CMLP?
Yeah, and that goes back to the three outcomes I see. It's either going to be, we stop charging a second meter fee entirely, and each customer just gets one meter charge, or we define some value for having a second meter, or we keep with the 2 meter fees for customers that have auxiliary meters. And I think you were discussing the idea of not having a second $18 charge for these customers and just bundling it into the cost of what we're doing.
I just also want to remind us all that when the last cost of service study assessed what would have been closer to an $80 a month fee, that would have been the meter charge for fixed costs. We are nowhere near collecting that. I think our current rate is $18.
$18.50.
$18.50, not nowhere near the $80. And again, I just want to remind us that it's a cost neutral to the customer concept, where you'll pay the same amount, it's just whether it's in that bucket or the other bucket.
Right. But
We should know our total cost and decide, is it a per meter cost or a per customer cost? We've been doing it per customer so far.
well, this is the reason we have this agenda topic, is because that changed. We were doing per customer, and with these customers, we started doing per meter. And I think the easiest option is to go back to per customer, but I agree that we should collect, under a time of use structure, I don't want to see a lot of new sub-meters, and I want to see old sub-meters start going away. So the idea of putting a fee on a second meter incentivizes people to, you know, get off of those rates when we're at time of use. I think this is a little premature, but
I think just one thing to add, Brian, it's
Yeah.
per account. Right, so one customer could have 3 accounts. And typically the meter charge would be per account.
yes. So if someone owns a duplex and they have renters, yeah.
A duplex is an example that they'd have 2 services coming in and 2 meters. Each account would have a meter charge.
Yeah, and that seems perfectly appropriate. But when you have someone like Janet, who I can see has her hand up, who is, you know, her garage is, you know, 200 feet away from her unit, and because of the way it was wired by the developer, she has to have the second meter, and then suddenly she's paying, instead of $18.50, she's paying nearly almost $40 a month. I don't feel that's fair. And that's what we're working on today, is try to find a better solution. Let's see, let's time check. We're
doing
about,
okay.
go ahead.
We're doing okay. We got 5 minutes left on this topic.
All right, so I'm gonna ask Pamela Dritt if you'd like to say something, and then I'll go to Janet.
Thank you, Pamela Dritt, 13 Concord Green. I understand that I propose that we shift to charging customers for our fixed costs, anticipating the day in which electricity itself is nearly free and Concord Municipal Light Plant still had to cover salaries and equipment. But that day shouldn't be anticipated. And all businesses have fixed costs. We don't, like grocery stores and hardware stores and plumbers. You don't charge customers and restaurants cover charges to go into the grocery store. The majority of, we shouldn't be switching our costs per customer because that's going to incentivize people not to use electric, not to adopt solar panels and electric cars. Particularly, we shouldn't charge a second meter fee to anyone who needs one simply to be able to charge their electric car. That's unfair and discourages people from adopting electric cars. And like Alice says, customers who install solar also shouldn't be charged for distribution charges and other fixed charges that they don't use. They should, solar customers are customers who are making investments in solar that CMLP then doesn't have to.
Great, thank you, Pamela.
Please don't switch over to separate fixed chargers prematurely and then discourage the sole reason for doing it.
Okay, I think we understand your point. Thank you. Janet.
I'm Janet Miller, 1647 Main Street, Concord Riverwalk condominium. And as Brian pointed out, I have no choice. If I want to charge my electric vehicle, then I have to have a second meter. And I think 3 years ago, CMLP was so actively encouraging the use of electric vehicles that they offered 3 $25,000 grants for multi-unit dwellings. And this, having an extra meter charge completely, it completely opposite in that it discourages people from wanting to charge an electric car. And I would say that an extra $18 on my bill was almost as much as the amount of electricity I use per month. to charge my car. I think that's my point.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts from board members? I'll tell you where I am. I think that we should stop charging the second $18 charge. And I think in the cost of service study, I think we should look at what a cost of a meter is. And then when we deploy time of use, part of that deployment will be some, third-party consultant will tell us what a second meter fee should be. I think that is a better plan of action. I don't want to, the reason we're talking about it now is because people are being hit with these fees now, like Janet. I'd like to stop hitting them with the fees until time of use comes out and we decide what we're going to do about a second meter. And Dave, this is new. We didn't talk about this idea beforehand, so I want to get your thoughts.
I think, with this, it really comes down to, obviously the meter cost, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
There's O&M depending on the scenario. And I think you have to factor all that in so you can come up with the cost and see how much we're absorbing if we do away with the second meter charge. The example of, and we have a few of these where you have a home on a parcel and you have a guest house, that's a scenario where they should have 2 meter charges. And we shouldn't be absorbing the second one because there's 2 separate services. There's O&M on that. So those are things that we have to factor into the scenarios. And I think until we factor all that in, it's going to be difficult to make a decision. I put the scenarios together and I think, we need to go through the financial piece of that so that we can come up with an informed decision.
Yeah, it is nuanced and complex because, there's a reason for not charging and for charging the fees based on the scenarios. Janet is an example of, she got an EV. We want to make sure that EV doesn't charge during peaks and she's on the plan. But based on the layout of her property, she has to have 2 meters. So
Well,
I'd like, go ahead.
Well, some of it's the decision that's made by the developer, right?
Yeah.
So in some cases, we have the scenario where you have a house and an attached garage, and to run the line from the main panel in the house to the garage is more than putting a separate meter socket on. So there's a decision that's made there, and then we end up running the line to the garage. So those are the scenarios that we need to factor in because that's where the O&M comes in, right?
Yep.
And that's the cost that we have to absorb if we waive the second meter charge. So I think there's some scenarios that we need to go through. If there's a house that has 3 meters on the house because they're participating in programs, we only have 1 line drop to that. So the O&M doesn't change. And
So, well, how about this? So the line drop is really where you see the distribution collection, not the customer. So Janet might be a rare example of, you talked about someone having a second house on the same property, kind of the Hubbard Street condo kind of setup. They should be getting 2 meter fees. And then I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. But applying that to someone like Janet, who has just a line drop to her garage, you can see how the customer feels that's unfair. Now, there is a line drop, there are costs, I do understand that, and we do have to recoup those costs. But and the $18, I think, is over collection for that.
the difference, Brian, with Janet's is the developer put in the line drop, CMLP didn't.
Yeah, and that developer listened to the pilot that we did with the multifamily housing, and that's why they wired it that way.
But my point is we don't have O&M on that drop.
Oh, all right.
So that's where I'm talking about different scenarios.
Yeah.
You can put a little more information into each scenario and what has O&M and what doesn't, and look at it from that perspective.
I'm going to go to John, but then I'm going to come back and I'm going to try to ping the board members on where they are on this and what they're looking for, so that you can have a good definition of what the board wants before we conclude. John.
I guess the question I was going to ask, Brian, given that you're talking about dropping the second meter fees, how long are we talking about here? How long is it going to take to come up with an estimate of the cost of a second meter? And I guess I would say, we know that there is a cost associated with the second meter. We know that $18.15 per month is more than that cost. So maybe, if it's going to be an extended period of time, maybe the appropriate decision would be to significantly reduce that second meter charge. If it isn't going to be a significant period of time, I guess I'm less concerned about that. So that's kind of my perspective. You don't need to come back to me.
Okay. Yeah, I think if we were to defer, it would be a year, because we'd have to get AMI deployed and so forth. So it would be a significant amount of time. I think here's my thought, and each of the board members should summarize their thoughts. I feel that we should have a meter fee per household. So the $18 per household. I think eventually we need some second meter fee for around $5 that is for houses that have 2 meters, but it's still one family. I'd like to see in the interim that we identify those houses that have families that, where the meter isn't just doing a garage, and they keep each household gets 1 meter charge. And then those houses like Janet's that have a meter, we stop charging them 2 fees, and we do our analysis. And when we have time of use deployed, we start adding these meter fees as a way to incentivize people to drop the legacy rates and get rid of them. That's where I am. Alice, where are you?
I think I'm more in the frame of mind that the sub-meters were not a choice by most homeowners who opted for the incentives to either install solar or EV or whatever. And that a per household cost that assesses every household what its fair value for the fixed cost is where we should be heading. I know we're looking at another cost of service study. I think we should ask the have the cost of service study do this analysis for us, so that we can come back with a more informed, data-driven decision. That's why we're hiring experts to help us with the cost of service. And as I said, our last study said $80 a month. Is that a good estimate, solid estimate of our collective costs?
It was $64 and change for full fixed recovery for a residential customer. So it wasn't quite 80, but it was high.
And Brian, can I just jump in there real quick?
Yes, please.
Just so that we're all on the same page. If a customer's participating in something, they have a sub-meter, they don't get a second meter charge for that sub-meter.
Today and tomorrow, that still is true. But once we come up with a second meter fee, we can discuss whether or not that should apply. Because once we get to time of use, all of the expenses should be in that rate so that behavior can drive that. Bianca, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're trying to balance. I think we're trying to come up with policies when we're flying blind.
Welcome to the light board.
I think hopefully that's not going to be the case permanently. I think we should just do that cost of service study, and then we figure out what's fair and what's not. I mean, to Alice's point, whether it's, if you're, we have solar, I'm assuming, I guess that means we have a second meter, but David just said we're not getting charged for that. And I'll probably, if there's all kinds of fairness issues that we can discuss fairness issues once we know what the cost of the service is. But the pricing needs to be cost neutral, right? And so it's going to be a question of how are we going to redistribute the cost of the service But I think we don't know what the cost of the service is, so we should just leave this topic alone until we know.
And what do you think we should do with customers in the interim? Because this may be you know, a while before we have the cost of
Yeah,
service.
we leave things as is. We do not touch anything, because because let's say we remove that second meter charge to whomever is being charged right now, and then we do a cost of service and we're just like, oh, you know what, that was wrong, we shouldn't have done that. Then we're going to, all the customers are going to come back and say like, well, you removed the fee and now you're putting back the fee. It's always best to just leave things as is until we know for sure. And whatever decision we make is then going to be the final one.
Okay. Laura.
I just wanted to suggest as a possible medium ground that, unless Dave slaps me down here and says it's not possible, I think what we could do is we could come back to you with a range of actual costs based on the last cost of service studies FERC account assignment to the meter charges. Okay, but 2022 costs, so updated. And it's going to be arranged because it's going to, depending on Dave's scenario, you're going to have the least cost one is going to be one that's an extra meter that's sub-metered to the existing account. So there are physical meter costs, you know, O&M on the meter reading, okay, but nothing else. Then you're going to have separate garage, which also has a separate line, and that line has to be paid for. So there's going to be like this range. And we could come back to you and show you what the range is for the different scenarios. And that might give folks like Bianca a little bit of, you know, tethering to the ground of how much money we're talking about. It's not going to be precise because it's going to be different for different scenarios, and it may be difficult to quantify exactly what pieces of equipment apply in each of those scenarios. But I think we could come up with some kind of range. Do you agree with that, Dave?
Yeah, I do think we can come up with the cost, and I think we should do that. But I also agree with Alice that, you know, as part of a cost of service study, we should have the consultant look at it as well, because this is a big topic and we want to get it right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. John, do you want to summarize your thoughts?
I was going to actually offer a suggestion similar to what Laura proposed. I mean, right, there is cost information out there. It's not as current as we'd like. That's an appropriate place in terms of putting in place an interim solution.
All right, so let me see if I can summarize what I think the board is thinking, which is we're going to do some analysis based on the last cost of service study to come back at the August 23rd meeting to give some more grounded numbers on how much a second meter charge should be. Is that the marching orders for the next month? Alice, Bianca, John?
I just want to clarify, what is do we have a mandate in terms of when we want to resolve this cost of the second meter charge?
Well, this has been going on for quite a while, and we're trying to resolve it. But you know, this is unfortunately the way it works. This is, for a while there, we were doing 2 meetings a month because there was such a backlog of these kinds of discussions. And you know, so we got a big gap here. It's summertime. This is what happens. But I think coming back with a proposal from staff on what that second meter charge should be and who they feel it should apply to is, I think, a good analysis to do, and giving some grounding based on the past cost of service study with updated numbers on how that value should be set. Is that Laura, do you feel that's accomplishable for the next meeting? Great. And then I think at the next meeting, we will decide if it's going to be a vote, so that we're going to make a decision at the next meeting, because I want to conclude some of these things that have been ongoing, because I know people like Janet are paying, you know, quite a lot for the fixed cost recovery, and it's been 9 months that we've been trying to resolve this. So I want to resolve it for her. And,
So when when we have the consultant and the time of day charges assessed and all that, then the second meter will be charge will be reassessed at that time.
it'll be, yeah. So right now they're just getting duplicate meter fees, which is
Okay.
1850 times 2.
Okay.
So what the staff will come back with is a 1850 plus a second meter fee of
Whatever. And then when we do,
about $5.
when
yeah.
the consultants finish their study, which may be another year, then okay, gotcha.
Then we get a third party consultant to tell us what that number really should be and follow the philosophy, and we get better recovery of cost.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So I think that's I'm going to call it on this discussion. And Dave and Laura, you feel you know what we're going to ask for the next August meeting?
Yep, no,
Okay.
I think it's clear. The one thing I would say is, we don't know if it's gonna be $5. You pull that number
Correct,
in
yeah.
there, the analysis will show what we come up with, so.
Yes, good clarification. I just use that number as a placeholder,
Sure.
and good to point out that that's what I'm doing. All right, so it is 8:37. We're about 12 minutes behind, but our next topic is the R7 residential rate service. And I know
Lori, you
this,
wanna take this?
yes.
Dave, do you want me to do this or you want to do
Yep,
this?
no, you can do it. I'm gonna pull it up.
You're gonna pull it up for me? Okay, great. So this is probably gonna be a little bit challenging for our board members who haven't been part of this discussion all along. But a number of years ago, CMLP staff, the engineering staff, discovered that customers who had both solar and a sub-metered usage, like a car, a time of use car, a heat pump, or an ETS heating unit, could be getting billed by CMLP for kilowatt hours that CMLP did not provide, but were in fact provided by the solar panels, because the sub-meter would turn and we would see the recording and CMLP would charge based on that. But it was possible that while that meter was turning, the actual kilowatt hours were coming from the solar. So when we discovered that, by law, we're not allowed to bill people for kilowatt hours we don't provide. So we had to fix it. We told people they had one of two options. They could either, one, remove the sub-meter and whatever special rate they were getting, either for their off-peak for their car or for the R7 rate, the lowest tier rate all winter, or for ETS, the ETS rate, they would no longer get. And that usage would simply be added to their house panel and they'd be charged the regular R1 rate. That was one option. The second option was to reconnect that sub-metered usage, what we call line side, to the utility. So rather than being sub-metered through the panel, it would be a separate connection to CMLP, in which case the solar could no longer feed it at all, right? Those kilowatt hours would definitely be coming from CMLP. But they didn't have the benefit of reducing that use by solar when they want to. Some folks like Brian and Jim Terry installed switches that enabled them to go back and forth between letting the solar feed the usage or having CMLP, but they were definitely in the minority. Most customers chose one of both paths. So some of our customers chose door number 2, where they would reconnect their use line side. And in particular, heat pump customers on our R7 rate chose this path. Well, the R7 tariff was designed initially when it was created only to consider heat pumps as a sub-metered use to the main panel. So there was no meter charge associated with the rate. To be consistent with the way we're charging other customers now, if a customer has connected line side to CMLP, they should be getting this meter charge. So what we're proposing here in the R7 tariff is that we change it and we say, there is a meter charge for this rate. However, that meter charge will be waived if it's a sub-meter. So those customers who chose the line side connection would now be getting the 1850 charge. I realize you guys just talked about this and don't like the fact it's a second 1850 charge, but we do need to be fair. I mean, why should Janet be paying 1850 for a line side connection, but a heat pump customer not be paying 1850 for a line side connection? And the other change we want to make to this tariff is something I noted when we were going through and reviewing it. Dave, if you could page down. The tariff incorrectly referred to the NYPA power cost adjustment clause being applicable to the rate. That's not true. And because NYPA is definitely an allocation, I think by law, on a per customer basis, per residential customer basis. So we can't have the customer getting the NYPA cost adjustment on their heat pump and getting it on their house meter. They can only get it once. So we're proposing to remove this reference to the NYPA power cost adjustment in the R7 tariff. And those are the two changes that we're proposing here for you today. This is a tariff. It is something you would need to vote on to change.
Whoa. So.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
remind
complicated.
me of the process for, should we discuss or should we suspend and open up the hearing? Dave?
Yeah, I think we just gave the background, Laura did, so I would suspend and go into a rate hearing and discuss it.
Okay. Alice, you're better at this than I am about going into rate hearings. Do you mind helping me out?
Sure. I move that we end discussion of our general meeting and enter into a discussion, enter into a rate hearing on the R7 electric resistance and heat pump heating system service rates.
Great. Could I get a second from John or Bianca?
Second it.
Great. And Alice,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Bianca.
What am I voting on again?
You're voting on whether we should go into a session, a rate hearing session.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Requires a roll call vote because we're virtual.
This is why Alice is the expert on this, and I mess it up every time. I agree as well. So we'll open the rate hearing, and in discussing the rate hearing, so this, I feel like this rate change is adding to the problem we had discussed with the second meter. And I don't think the board wants to add to that problem while we're still trying to solve it. This, Bianca had pointed out in our last discussion that we shouldn't, suspend collecting the second meter charge while we're deciding what a final outcome is. Why would we do the reverse and add a meter fee to a rate while we're deciding what we're going to do? So that's my general thoughts on this. I think that we should modify this so that we remove that NYPA statement. But I understand the inconsistency, but back to Bianca's point of change, let's do thoughtful change and not just change here and there to make things similar. But what are other board members' thoughts on this?
I would agree with you, Brian. I think that sounds like a very complicated issue. And we're in the middle of trying to solve the bigger issue of second meter charges. So I would say, let's just table this and not do no changes until we have a bigger picture view.
John, your thoughts on this change? Do you have any questions about this change? Because you guys are new. And the R7 rate is wonky in any scenario. So if you have questions, don't feel free to ask.
So I guess I'm more comfortable with what's being proposed. And moving forward, but I hear what's being proposed by you, Brian and Bianca, and I'm okay with that course of action. So
Alice, your thoughts?
I do not feel like we should be adding a new fee to ETS. I understand the conversation that many conversations we've had about this and why we might want to do that as a question of equity or fairness across all systems. ETS was a separate category for a lot of reasons. The way the system operates is unlike most others in Concord. And I just think while we're figuring out how we want to manage a second meter charge would not be the time for us to be arbitrarily adding a meter fee charge here that hadn't had one already in, prior to this. So I agree that we should change the language in NIPA, make that clear. But I could see deferring, adding a new charge for ETS customers until we have a better solution to the bigger question about how we manage all customers with multiple meters.
Yeah, and I believe this is the, so there, Dave or Laura, please correct me, but there is no, you cannot be on the R7 rate for the whole house. Is that right? This is always going to be in a rider in addition to an account rather than, some houses can be all time of use. Most houses are R1, but going for a whole house R7, that doesn't exist today,
No,
correct?
you can't do that. The only usage that is allowed treatment at the R7 rate is the heat pump. You
Or
can't
electric
combine-
resistant.
Yeah,
Sorry, or electric resistance,
Yeah.
yeah. But I do want to correct Alice, you mentioned ETS a couple of times. It's not the ETS we're talking about here, it's the heat pumps.
Okay, yeah, I got it.
You might have
Okay.
just used the wrong word.
Yeah, sorry.
all right. So we'll.
Can I add something to this?
Yeah.
Just,
Absolutely.
it'll just add to the more mix of possible confusion, but since this is yet unresolved, I'll throw it out. Laura had mentioned the cost of the meter itself, which I think is about $200 and some. And one of just an idea to throw out there, and depending, hopefully, as we go forward, everybody gets heat pumps, which would mean maybe everybody has a second meter. There could be just an amortization of that cost. If it's $200 or $250, we amortize it over whatever the life of it is to charge the customer, or the customer can pay for it up front.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you were done. So time of use, the hope is that we'll get rid of all of these special rates.
Okay.
And we'll offer load control for certain devices like ETS, hot water heaters, but this R1 rate is aimed towards electric resistance and heat pumps, and the customer, based on the time of use pricing, can decide when to operate those units. So they can do their own decisions based on the time of use structure instead of the flat rate structure that we have today, and being given this, this waiver for the way it operates under the flat rate structure. So hopefully, because you'd mentioned that we hope to get a lot of heat pumps, and that means a lot of second meters. The change to time of use removes the need for this rate, so we don't have a whole bunch of meters.
Oh, but I thought maybe I didn't understand this correctly. So what I thought Laura had said is that if you have solar panels and heat pumps,
Yes,
we're overcharging, and because we're overcharging, you have to have a separate meter for the heat pump just to make sure they're not being overcharged. And
well, yeah, so sorry to interrupt again, but I'm just going to be concise. So the reason that there's a meter on the device is because this rate only applies to the heat pump or the resistance electricity. when someone gets solar, it replaces the house meter to a bidirectional house meter. And the way we're doing metering, the sub-meter can't tell if the solar is generating the electricity or if the grid is generating the electricity.
Right.
And so CMLP is charging the customer based on the sub-meter for solar energy. If we go to time of use, we get rid of the sub-meter, we only have the house meter. So if the house is producing electricity, it pushes from the house to the street and then from the street. So it simplifies things. So that's where we're headed. This is the trouble with discussing existing rates, is we've got all these legacy problems and we're talking about a future that's very different. Did that clarify what was going on?
I think so. And I think Laura is talking about new installations, right? Getting these, and I guess I want to make sure I'm using the correct language, because I think I heard Laura say second meter, but really David had clarified that it's really a sub meter and there is no charge for a sub meter, right?
Yeah.
So so these customers that are having this problem, they're getting a sub meter installed currently because we don't have time of day charges pricing yet. And because there's this problem with the solar, right?
So if they have solar, they're getting a second, and they're choosing to do this, they're getting a second meter connected line side. It's not sub-metered.
Oh, it's not sub-metered.
Because the
Okay.
sub-meter was the problem only with the solar. It's only a problem for solar customers. And as Brian said, the future is we get rid of all the sub-meters. So we get rid of this problem of charging them for stuff that we didn't provide, because they just have the house meter and they have their solar. And that we can figure out if energy's coming or going.
Okay.
All right. All right. So to summarize, I think the board would like to change the language about the NIPA credit, but make no other changes. Is a straw poll before we go into the vote. Is that where people are? Okay.
I
Brian,
think you need
before
to
you go
take
into the-
comments from the public.
Yeah. that's
Oh,
what
I'm sorry. Thank you. Again, for hearings, I'm bad on procedure. Pamela, you have a comment related to the R7 residential service.
Yes. We should do the opposite of disincentivize solar installations. Make sure nobody who has solar or heat pumps gets they should be incentivized. That should be unfairly benefit those customers rather than try to make some covering your costs thing, because we want everybody to do that. And that's the only way you can get everybody to do that. Give up on we have to make it fair. Nothing you do is going to be fair.
Yeah.
And incentivize solar and heat pumps and electric vehicles,
Okay.
batteries.
Yes, I want to keep it to the R7 rate. All right. Thank you, Pamela.
R7 rates, you want to switch people off of doing resistance heating, right? But that is applying to heat pumps? I don't understand.
So the R7 rate applies mostly to people with resistance electricity and heat pumps. And what that allows them to avoid is the tiers in the current R1 rate structure. So they'll be at tier 1 pricing instead of tier 3 with the increased energy consumption. So it's not an incentive rate. It is a way to, and it is fair cost recovery, but
From rates from those customers because they have to have extra usage for their things.
it allows people to get off of transportable fuels and natural gas to heat their home and get them on electricity. That's the point of this R7 rate.
Right.
It doesn't distinguish between which electric technology.
Right. All right. Well, I think it should distinguish.
Yep, that's fine.
And I don't think you should get rid of it for the heat pump people.
Okay. Thank you, Pamela. Any other public comments on the R7 rate? All right, so Alice, do you mind helping me close the rate hearing?
I move that we,
I think you want to take a vote before you close it.
Is that the process?
Yeah,
All right,
okay,
so do you mind making a motion, Alice?
well, if we're not closing the rate hearing, we
You-
are now taking a vote on the heat pump an electric resistance rate.
Correct.
So
And-
we
and the
need a motion
modification.
at this point. It is now the chair of the board can request a vote of the board, having taken all public comment.
Yeah.
So it's a board, it's a chair's prerogative now to take a vote of the board.
Yes, so I would like to take a vote of the board, and I don't think as the chair I'm able to make the motion, but the motion would be to make the adjustment in the language to this rate for the NIPA credit, but not make the other suggested changes. Do you mind stating that so that the chair is making the motion?
Yes, so, so I move that the R7 residential service electric resistance and heat pump heating systems and hot water systems rate be amended to change the date of the schedule to September 1, 2023, and make change the language that so that it reads the above rate per kilowatt hour will be adjusted plus or minus in accordance with the formula specified in the purchase power cost of adjustment clause, and remove the remaining section of that sentence. No other changes be made to the current R7 rate.
Like a pro, thank you. John, yes.
Need a second.
or no? What's that?
you need a second.
Second.
Like I said, I'm terrible with procedure. John, you gave a second. You agree or disagree?
Agreed.
Bianca,
Agree.
Alice,
Yes,
and I agree as well. Thank you. Now we get to make a motion to close the rate hearing.
I move that we close the rate hearing and return to open session.
Second.
And John gave a second. Bianca,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Alice,
Yes,
and I agree as well. All right. We got through the rate hearing. Now we get to go on to,
I need to leave. My apologies.
okay.
Right.
Thank you, John.
Bye.
All right. So we're going to move on to valuing load control, and it's just before 9. Dave, do you want Laura to take this?
Yeah, Laura's gonna take this one.
Okay.
Can you guys see the slide deck?
Yep,
Okay. Is that big enough for everyone?
Yes. Do you mind swapping? What is it? This how do you switch from presenter view to presentation view?
I thought I was in, okay.
Yeah, I think you're sharing the presenters because I see 2 slides. I see slide 1 and the next coming slide.
I see. Hold on a second. Let me try again.
Okay. Laura, I think you're muted.
Dave, you can open up a PDF if that's
Oh.
easier.
He's got it.
Are we good now?
We're good.
Okay.
Okay, so Brian asked us to figure out what is the value to CMLP of being able to control load. And in particular, in this example, I'm going to focus on ETS load. That's the electric thermal storage heating units, which represents a significant load for CMLP. It's between 3 and 4 megawatts. So we have the ability to charge those units within parameters. We can't just not charge them at all, but we can choose when to charge them. And typically we charge them overnight. If you go to the next slide, On the left, oh, you didn't open up the new one. Brian, I did change the hours, but it didn't make it in this version, so sorry.
No
On the
problem.
left is what a typical residential customer utilizes in a given day. Along the bottom axis are the 24 hours in the day. And on the left vertical axis is the percent of the customer's load that they use during that hour. So you can see they're only using about 3% of their total during the nighttime between midnight and 6 or 7 a.m. And then they use more, and then they typically peak. This is an evening, a January load shape. So they're peaking between 5 and 9 p.m. and then it goes back down again. If we contrast that with the way we typically charge the ETS units, we typically charge them at night between 10 p.m. So hour ending 23 at the right, and 6 a.m. Because when it's cold, these units do need a boost during the day. We then typically boost them for a couple of hours, usually between noon and 4 p.m. when we expect prices and load to be lowest. So the bars represent what a typical controlled ETS load looks like. And then the maroon line is what an ETS unit has looked like in January when we're not controlling it. So you can see that it does run at night when it's cold, but then it sort of falls off during the day and does experience some of the same peak. So there's a value, energy costs less at night than it does during the day. So it costs us less to serve this controlled ETS load than it does to serve this January R1 load, because prices tend to be the highest just during those hours that the residential load is using the most, between 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. So if we go to the next slide, the lower energy cost associated with the ETS has ranged on a monthly basis from a negligible benefit, 0.00026 cents, which is almost zero, to 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour. And the long-term average between controlled and uncontrolled ETS load has averaged 70 points, or 0.7 cents. The difference between serving the controlled ETS load and the R1 load is 90 points, or 0.9 cents, so roughly a penny. In addition to lower energy cost, if you go to the next slide, Dave, we have a lower volatility cost associated with the off-peak load. Because on-peak prices are more volatile than off-peak prices, the option cost of serving this load, because when we serve load, we're basically short a call option, okay? It's the customer's ability to call on load from us. And if they're calling on that load during the on-peak hours, the cost of that option is higher than if they're calling on the load during the off-peak hours. I've done a lot of work trying to quantify precisely what this cost might be. It's very difficult. The off-peak options really don't trade. And so it's some non-zero value that I'm unable to get a precise number on. However, it's somewhat offset by the fact that with the ETS load in particular, we're also short what we call a fixed price option. The option that we're saving is an option on a spread, and the option that we're short is a fixed price option, which is worth more. And that's because the ETS units use more when it's colder. So just when it's a lot colder and prices are a lot higher is exactly when the ETS units need more of a boost in the afternoon, and I have to serve them with more kilowatt hours. So this whole option value issue is probably fairly moot. There's a non-zero benefit associated with the spread option, but then it's offset by what we're short on a fixed price option basis. So if your takeaway from this slide should probably be that I don't think it should impact the value because we can't quantify it, and there's offsetting values. So if we go to the next slide, we obviously have lower peak costs associated with serving controlled ETS load and R1 load. It's about 3 cents for transmission and 2 cents for capacity. But that's the case with any type of off-peak load. Whether it's off-peak, time of use, we'd always be avoiding these peak-related costs of transmission and capacity. So the real question for the board to consider here, if we go to the next slide, we know there are lower power supply costs. This is from the last cost of service study. The costs that were allocated to ETS customers versus residential customers. You can see that roughly 6 cents of lower power supply costs consisting of the lower transmission capacity and energy costs that we just identified above. But then the real question is for the board, okay, of these other costs, which are you going to allocate to electric thermal storage? In the past, the protocol has been that the ETS load was not assessed an additional meter operation and maintenance costs, service costs, which are primarily the CARES costs for incentivizing things like heat pumps and electric vehicles that the utility spends money on. They weren't assessed additional meter reading costs or billing system costs for the ETS meter. They were getting all these costs on their main house meter, but they weren't being assessed them on the ETS meter. And the question for the board is, should the ETS meter be assessed in duplicative basis on the ETS meter, these costs, the meter operation and maintenance down to the billing system cost, because that's going to add up to what's assessed for our distribution cost. So that is, I believe, the last slide. Dave, is that correct?
Correct.
Great.
What to go forward with?
Do you mind leaving that slide up, Dave?
Sure.
Not a
Oh,
problem.
So, yeah, this is something we've talked about many times with ETS. What was stated in the past is that ETS saves money because it's a large controlled load. And there was a statement that said we can't quantify how much value it brings for contracting, but it does bring value because our load profile has less volatility. And that slide that Laura described kind of explained that there's positives and negatives to that. Yes, it does give us better options when it shows less volatility, but when it is volatile, it is during the times when prices are high for heating loads, because natural gas constraints make the market go more expensive. The other discussion for new members is that ETS was incentivized heavily in the beginning. Large rebates were given, special rate was given, and basically it was passed through the cost of off-peak generation and don't collect for any of the fixed cost recovery of distribution network or so forth in the sale of those kilowatt hours. That is shifted to a fractional collection in those categories. My feelings, as I've expressed many times on this topic, are that we should treat every kilowatt as a kilowatt. So there should be full collection for the service cost, the operation, the meter, the billing, all the distribution system costs should be a full share. But that's my opinion. And I think the value that load control brings is that just under a penny. And that would be where I feel that we can give value to customers on load control. Now, I'm one guy on the board. I have strong opinions on this. Alice has heard them many times and is probably tired of hearing them. And this is an introduction to John. Well, John has left, so it's an introduction for Bianca on this topic. But I've kind of lost the thread. I want to make sure we get the agenda purpose answered. So Laura, what do you need from the board going forward on this topic?
well, I think, Brian, if I understood your your background and purpose correctly. The idea is we're trying to get board direction on future credits to be applied to any type of load that is controlled, whether it's ETS, water heaters, or potentially in the future, pool pumps and thermostats and any other thing we can think of that we can control. What value should be given to customers who give CMLP the right to provide energy to those uses when we see fit.
Yeah.
Because people should be incentivized to do it. Otherwise, why would they do it?
Dave, do you mind going to the slide that talked about the 9/10 of a cent?
Nope.
There it is. So I think this slide is where I kind of answers the question for me of what value does the utility get from controlling a customer's load? And if the next slide is a wash, this slide kind of gives some quantity to that. Now, I want to ask you, Laura, if we were to say anybody on load control gets a penny off a kilowatt hour for that device, if we're using ETS as a model, would that apply to a water heater or to a controlled thermostat or some other technology like that?
Well, Dave, you may want to chime
Yeah.
in here.
So
Okay.
Brian, I think to that point, each scenario is different. So a hot water heater, when we control that, we don't know exactly what the value is going to be because we don't know if the hot water heater is going to be calling for, to be heating the water at the time. An air conditioning system, we know the average runs for 45 minutes out of the hour. So we know we'd have a much higher control over that and what the value would be. Whereas, ETS is different from hot water and air conditioning. We did do a pilot probably 15 years ago, maybe something like that, 10, 15 years ago on a pool pump control. And again, was that pool pump scheduled to come on during that period of time? So we didn't get a lot of value out of that pilot. So each of the four scenarios is different.
So the idea of a single value per kilowatt for a load control is not realistic.
Correct, unless you did it for each of the four scenarios. You had four different
Values. So one would be, a half penny, one might be 2 pennies, but they're not all gonna come out like ETS at about a penny.
Right. I think the highest value to us would be controlling central air conditionings.
Yeah, okay.
What
Yeah,
is the question that we're trying to get answered?
the question proposed was, how do we value load control? And Dave, if you want to remove the slides, we can see each other. But the question has been, what is the value to the utility for controlling devices in the home? And ETS is the biggest one of these controlled loads. And there's been debate on the value it brings to contracting, the costs it brings for heating during the coldest days in the winter. There's been questions about, when it's operated, when those boosts happen, do they hit any kind of peaks? And the answers are here in this presentation for ETS. And the answer that I kind of hear from this presentation is that the utility is saving a little less than a penny a kilowatt by controlling the load and when it
Well,
goes.
I think what I also heard though is it's some of the way that the electricity is priced, that there is value on the options. And I suppose it's like the contracting that you guys do is option based, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so that was the slide that she discussed was a walk. The value that we get in the options is offset by the higher prices when it operates. So by controlling the load to operate during times at which the temperature has dropped, when the temperature drops, New England experiences a constraint in natural gas, and the majority of generation in New England is natural gas based. So when there's constraint in natural gas, the prices go up, and those really cold days in winter are that exact scenario. So ETS is drawing when the market price of electricity is high, but they're also reducing our volatility. So when we contract, we're saving a little bit of money because we're showing less volatility in our load when we do long-term contracts. And that slide, Laura assessed to be basically a wash, where there's no value.
If I understood correctly, Laura, you said that you couldn't value that difference, right? In the optionality of, did I understand that correctly, or you did or you
So
didn't?
there are two components to the option. One benefits CMLP and ETS load, and that is we have the right to charge those units during the off-peak hours versus the on-peak hours. So let's pretend we have a really cold day and prices go to $300 a megawatt hour during the on-peak and $175 during the off-peak.
Mhm.
Well, on that day, it's worth $125 a megawatt hour for us to be able to charge the ETS units during the $175 hours versus the $300 hours. On the other hand, we're short a fixed price option because yesterday the ETS units used 100 kilowatt hours, and on the $300 day, they need 200 kilowatt hours because it's colder, and so they use more. So the second option is we're short a fixed price option due to the positive correlation between volume and temperature and price. Okay. The other one is the benefit of a spread, the difference between what it costs on peak and what it costs off peak. So one we're long, one we're short, and that's why I'm saying they kind of offset each other.
Okay. Okay.
But I couldn't value the spread one because we couldn't get market prices on the off-peak volatility. So I don't really know what that one is. And I'm just saying a wash because one is plus and one is minus. And we don't know. So let's just call it zero, was kind of my thinking. But, it's not great.
And just to defend Laura, she has done a lot of research into trying to find a quantitative value for these things. And that just simply doesn't
Oh,
exist.
I don't think she needs no
Yeah.
defense. Laura's
Okay.
brilliant.
Good.
Exactly.
She's brilliant. I thank you so much. I think we're so lucky to have her.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I know that I'm disappointed that Hal isn't here. I wanted to make sure he saw this discussion, so I'm gonna make sure he sees the video of this. He's one of the representatives of ETS. All right. So I think that gives us an understanding of the value of load control for ETS, but may not be directly translatable to pool pumps and air conditioning and so forth. So what I'm searching for in our time of use structure is to provide some kind of per kilowatt hour credit for load controlled devices. And it sounds like ETS might be a penny, but other devices might be something different. So I think in the cost of service study, we'll give them this kind of analysis and ask them, did they, based on ETS, do they think water heaters should get X value? Other things, we need to make sure that the load control actually avoids those transmission and capacity costs, and so forth. So I think this has been a good discussion on this. I think we've made some progress, but we still have some more work to do.
And Brian, do we have this? I don't know if I'm introducing another topic or if this is gonna, and please shut me down if this is not appropriate timing, but do we have a strategic plan for, let's say, a 2030 or a 2050 or even a 5 to 10 year strategic plan?
We do. It hasn't been updated in a while. We're working through it.
On the list of things to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's,
Alright.
but the strategic plan was done in 2017 and updated a few times. It's more or less relevant today, but we still have EV adoption goals, other goals. In fact, the best summary of that is actually found in the climate and resilience plan for
Okay.
those kinds of goals.
Okay, I'll look into that. Great, thank you.
I'll send it to you.
That'd be awesome. That'd be even better.
All right. Do we feel we had a good discussion on this topic? Getting some nods. I would like to open up to public and liaison comments. And please raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. All right, seeing none, I would entertain, Pamela Dritt.
Hi, 13 Concord Green. Is there no way to wire our new smart meters through the fiber optic system so that people who are afraid of RFD radiation can use the time of use rates and be safe at the same time?
So we have explored that extensively, and there is no good technology solution to do so.
There's really no excuse for that. There's got to be.
There isn't. I'm sorry, Pamela. We've done a lot of exploration on this. There is an Ethernet connected meter, but it was done in a pilot, is not readily available. I would love that solution to exist, but we've explored that.
I thought that's why we were buying smart meters who could. Which,
So the AMI system will use a wireless transmission, and the vast majority of residents are going to that system. The residents that are afraid of the radio signals, the only real option we have is the one presented. We have explored all the technology available, but the market simply does not have a good wired meter.
but the meter that, why can't, they don't have any meters that are both wired and wireless?
Correct. They're all wireless. It's either that or you go back to the 1960s analog meter. And what I believe the resolution was is to provide them a meter and take out the wireless card and then have somebody walk over and physically read it. But the device itself does not have a way to use a wired transmission of its data. It's an industry thing.
Wow, that's a problem, huh?
Yep. And I only know these answers because we've gone into such depth on trying to find exactly the solution you'd like to see. And unfortunately, we just cannot find it.
Yet.
If one comes on the market, we'll come back.
Can you, in the meantime, please exempt people like Janet from the double cost?
So
It's not fair.
I agree, but we're gonna keep working on it.
It would be for everybody in Concord Green too, if we ever get the ability to wire the parking sheds so that condo owners can have electric and charge electric vehicles at home. This is going to be really big. It's not fair to charge twice. Cost shouldn't be.
We're working on it, Pamela. We're working on it.
Until we're not selling enough electricity that we can't put it into the electricity costs instead, which I think we're shifting way too much onto fixed costs and shouldn't be. Distribution costs shouldn't be charged to solar producers. They produce it. They don't use the distribution and transmission charges. They should be exempted, if anything, not added to it.
Great, thank you, Pamela. I want to move on to Andy.
Yeah.
Andy, you're muted right now, but please provide your public comment.
Andy Puckrick, 164 Belknap Street. A question for Mr. Wood. Thank you for the stats on battery and hybrid EVs. I'm interested in 3 other areas. What do we know about solar, heat pumps, and what was the third one? Battery storage, residential battery storage. How is the town of Concord doing relative to other states in the Commonwealth?
Excuse me. So in terms of solar, I haven't checked it in a little bit, but the last I checked, we were the number 1, and Belmont was right behind us in solar adoption. We'd have to update that. I don't have the numbers on storage right in front of me, but we are getting some pretty good adoption there. I wouldn't say it's exceptional, but there is quite a bit of adoption in town. And what was the third one?
The heat pumps.
Heat pumps, we have a very high adoption rate. I can pull the numbers and email them to you if you'd like. I don't have them in front of me, but I can tell you that we're processing rebates every week.
I would like to see a quarterly or semi-annually report just on how the town is doing on our goals towards electrification.
Sure.
Thank you.
Andy, I'd like to also suggest MCAN has done a study of MLPs on their adoption and of those kinds of technology. And we were ranked number 1 out of the 40 utilities. But you can get kind of that data. It's a little dated now, but it's available there. And if I find your email, I'll try to send that to you.
And it's being updated right now.
Oh, good. Oh, so MCAN's reaching
It's
out.
going to be coming out soon.
Phil, you have a comment.
Good morning. How many customer accounts are there in town roughly?
About 8,500.
8,500. Okay. And of those 8,500, how many of them have sub-meters?
A small number, maybe a couple hundred.
Okay. And how many of them have accessory meters?
Again, that's a small number as well.
Okay. So am I correct that we're really, this discussion about the second meter charge really pertains to a pretty small subset of the ratepayer base?
I would say that's accurate.
Thank you.
That's a good question. So when Dave and Laura, when you come back to us in August and 23rd, it would be good to have the breakdown of those numbers. You know, how many people are in what scenarios, so that the board understands the impact. That's a good one.
Yeah, we can do that.
Excellent.
And as far as I understand, I mean, if we were a for-profit company, that we would probably not, we would check this whole issue out, and it would be that's that. But regardless of how many people are involved, these are residents of the town. If it's 200, 300 homes, it is 200 and 300 homes that we're looking after. You know, so it really doesn't matter if it's if there were one person that was being overly charged. I think it would be sufficient, just in terms of fairness, to make sure that everybody is treated well.
Yeah,
Right.
I can tell from this first meeting, Bianca, that you're very causation focused. You're very let's recoup our expenses fairly from those that create them, and I love that philosophy. That's I'm right there with you. Any other comments or questions? I don't see any. So Bianca, let's have you do the motion for us to adjourn.
Okay, I motion to adjourn our meeting.
Second,
Great. So Bianca
Yeah.
and
Yes.
Alex.
yes.
And I agree as well. Thank you, everyone, for coming this morning. Have a good day.
Thank you.